Whenever you discuss a historical event, it's very important to put down the context that surrounded that event. What was the situation leading up to it? What was the aftermath of it? Add in all this context, who was involved, who were the circumstantial people around them, what were the mechanisms taking place, at least at the time as we thought of them, how we imagined the world before, what happened in the context afterwards. The reason why this is so important is if you want to understand that event, this is what you're going to need to get a grasp on. This is what's going to need to be provided for you. If you're just going to look at a tournament and see that a team won the tournament and say they were the best team at the tournament, sure, that's going to have some merit to it. It's going to be very simplistic though, and you're going to be missing almost all the context. You're going to have some very basic context, right? They were the best, the team that played the best in the tournament, but were they the favourites going into the tournament? They were the team that played the best in the semi-finals and the final, but did they play the hardest opponent in the semi-final for them? Did someone else defeat that opponent for them? In the final, did the opponent play the same way they normally did in the final? All this context is going to be very important. And so you must do it for any historical event. Like, for example, if a team is very dominant and they win and they do fantastically and they're the best team of all time, you still need that context to understand to what degree, what magnitude their dominance and greatness was. So for example, in StarCraft Brood War, the player Flash, who's one of the best players of all time, early on, the reason you knew this guy was going to be a godlike player one day is that when he became very good around 2007, 2008, in 2008, early on, he won a tournament, the OSL, the most prestigious individual tournament, the On Game Net Star League, and he won it by beating what we now know in the context of history are the three best players of his era along with him. So he beat Jaedong, he beat Bisu, and he beat Stork, and that's how he won this OSL at a very young age, 15 years old. So at the time, they were already some of the best players in the world, and they've later gone on to be the best players of their era. So that makes that accomplishment even more good than if you just said he's one of the best players ever and he won this tournament. Who did he play? What form were they in what context? This is all very important. And so, as a result, I hate it when people don't put this context in because it leads to scenarios where the basic on-the-surface information doesn't tell the whole story. It can't. So, for example, there are teams who have won tournaments in an era when other teams were fragmented or were missing a star player or someone's retired or one team gets disqualified from all this sort of ambience can happen. They can just be in a down period like at the end of last year, early this year when Fnatic won all those tournaments, but everyone else was in disarray because the teams aren't as strong as they were at a different era in time. For example, Virtus.pro might have been better than the second best team in that particular era. Could have been the case. Virtus.pro only won one or two tournaments over that latter period of time, just before then. So you got to look at who you were playing as well. If you're the second best team of all time, and you play the best team of all time, and you lose to them every time, you might still be the second best team of all time, but no one's going to give you acknowledgement if they don't know the context. They're going to think you weren't that good, or you're a very good team, but who couldn't win, and then they're going to look at some team who won in an era where the best team of all time didn't play and go, right, they must be the second best. It's not going to work without that context. So as a result, in Counter-Strike, we have a very key piece of context that was added in earlier on this year, and now, to some degree, I think now needs to be removed or altered, which is that from March 2016 onwards, we've had to have a little asterisk next to each event champion. And what I mean by that is, it's not enough to just do, as I said before, and with every historical event, try and put in the context. With this particular period of time, I'd say March to May, you had to put the little asterisks in because it was the most important piece of context along with who won the tournament and where they placed. And that piece of context was that olofm of Fnatic and GuardiaN of Na'Vi, the two best players in the world, both had different injuries which limited, hindered or their performance or entirely prevented their performance. In the case of olofm, obviously. So for GuardiaN, IEM Katowice, he was unusually poor in that series against Tempo Storm, and then his team narrowly lost to Luminosity in the semi-finals. Now, yeah, they were still a fantastic team, Na'Vi were. Their system still worked, the other players were still very good. GuardiaN still had some games that were decent, but it was weird that he was so poor over his performance, because for the months preceding that, going back 5-6 months, he'd been absolutely phenomenal, tournament to tournament. Even when they were getting smashed by Fnatic in the Star Ladder final, he was amazing. Even the Cluj-Napoca final where they were getting wrecked, he was still very, very good. He single-handedly beat NIP. This is a guy who was in God mode. So when he is that poor, when it later emerges after Katowice that he had a hand injury, now it starts to make more sense, right? That context is pretty important, because otherwise we're thinking GuardiaN just fell off the boil. He's just bad now. He's just not as good. He's still a great player, but he's not a god anymore. No, actually we find out he's got an injury limiting him. Now, interestingly, he did come back out of it a little bit, which is at Counter Pit. He had a fantastic tournament again. He was very, very good. Not in every game, but especially in the final, he had some fantastic stuff. Now, the point to be made there is that sort of injury is not 100% or nothing. I mean, you'll see with professional sportsmen, they might have a bad injury, but they might be able to play in a specific game one week and get 20 minutes out of themselves and play to a good level for those 20 minutes, but then the injury might get worse next week and they have to go off for a while, or they might need a bit of time off, so either they play very limited numbers or they take a week off, then they come back and they're good, or they take a week off and they come back and they're bad. It's all over the place with these sorts of injuries. So MLG Columbus, the biggest tournament in the history of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, his team, after Fnatic was eliminated, were the favourites to win that whole event. That should have been their event to win. They beat Astralis in impressive fashion. They come against Luminosity, a team they've beaten numerous times before, that they certainly seem to have a map pool advantage over. And what happens? They lose a narrow first game where GuardiaN's really off, and then the second game they get smashed on Overpass. Now, after the tournament, we find out that GuardiaN was so limited in this scenario, he was using 4 times his normal sensitivity in the final against Luminosity. Now, that piece of context, if you don't know, again, you'd think he was terrible, that he crumbled under pressure, that he didn't have the balls to play in the final, and maybe he's not a true winner, or all this stuff. But if you find out that piece of information out, absolutely ridiculous circumstances to play under, then you understand why he had such problems. And you understand that this is someone where he wasn't just making excuses. What happened was, it's the biggest tournament ever, and his team was very good and had a chance to win, so he wanted to just grin and bear it, to try and get a chance to win, and not have to use Asterisk, and he wanted to just make it happen. And so it couldn't happen, didn't work for them, and they ended up losing. Now, that doesn't mean Luminosity weren't the best team in the tournament. That doesn't mean Luminosity aren't an all-time great team for winning. That doesn't mean any of that stuff, but you have to put the context in. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that Luminosity beat Na'Vi at Na'Vi's absolute peak with everyone in amazing form and GuardiaN in God mode form, and because that's what happens if you remove all the context. See, it would create an unfair expectation for Luminosity in who they were. Then you got to look at olofmeister. So olofmeister was already having some issues, but when it came to Columbus, you could see the issues there. When they got beaten by Team Liquid, already he wasn't an elite player in that game. Then that series against Astralis, the whole team got smashed, but he particularly was poor. You could see even like a limited range of motion when he was trying to AWP. It was really, really disappointing to see. He couldn't provide that for his team. And so, unfortunately, in his team, it's much more important in his team that he goes God mode than it is for GuardiaN in Na'Vi, which is amazing, because you would have thought it the other way around 8 months prior, right? Before, it was all about GuardiaN and Na'Vi, and olofmeister could be one of just another member of the players, of Flasher and Crims and JW. No, actually now it's the other way around, and so that's why his team struggled so much. And so you have to put the context that yes, they won the 6 tournaments leading up to that, but then what's the reason they did so poorly at Columbus? You have to add that in as a reason. It's not the sole reason, but it's a reason, and it's a pertinent and a significant and a relevant reason. Now, a reason why this really had to be an asterisk, more than just adding in the context, is these were the 2 best players in the world at the time. And, in the case of olofmeister, one of the greatest to ever play, and certainly GuardiaN, one of the all-time greats as well. So, think about the context of when these things happened. coldzera hadn't had his monster LAN performance like he had at MLG yet. He was still a good player, he was still a star player, he hadn't gone to that superstar level of where you dominate even at the biggest tournaments, like he did at that MLG Columbus. Nico was still proving himself at that superstar level. He was a star, he was very, very good on a losing team, so then to make yourself a superstar, you usually have to go God mode, which he has since. So that's the point, because now we have to consider the status of these injuries. We can't take for granted that either of these guys, GuardiaN, olofmeister, will come back and will be as strong as they were before. In GuardiaN's case, he's playing the games. He came back at DreamHack Malmö for the playoffs and didn't look that good. He had a couple of games at the Star Ladder that were good, but still not a god overall. He had the odd series where he was good. In his case, you have to actually consider that his injury supposedly wasn't as bad. He took less time off. He claimed he was clear a couple of times, like for Malmö, even if he didn't seem to be. Claims to be clear now and 100% okay. Now, for GuardiaN, you now have to start considering, maybe he's just legitimately not in God mode anymore, regardless of his health situation. Maybe his health is fine again. Because guess what? People come out of God mode as well. Get Right came out of it, Shocks came out of it, Kenny S came out of it, everyone comes out of it. Even olofmeister towards the latter part of the old Fnatic lineup was having games where he wasn't that sick anymore. You don't stay in that super transcendent top 10 of all time level form where you're just like unbelievable for like 2 years straight. Usually it happens like 3 to 6 months, and sometimes if you're a real god, maybe you could do like 9 months. That's really pushing it itself. So it was never going to last forever anyway, necessarily. They'd come out of it and maybe they go back into it later. So in GuardiaN's case, no longer for me does the asterisk really apply, unless I know some more details about his injury. Feels to me like now I just judge him based on his play, and maybe, as has happened in the past, before he went ham at Cluj-Napoca, he has months where he's not going to be as sick now. He has months where he goes off the boil a bit. That happened to him in the past, maybe it's happening now. Likewise, in terms of olofm, he does seem to have a serious injury, and from the things I heard, a pretty serious one, and that's why he's literally been out and isn't playing no matter what. Even when they've got a big tournament like ESL Pro League Finals, they're still not using him. He's still willing to sit that out because he knows that to risk coming back now is to jeopardize the whole future, and in the future he wants to be winning these $1 million majors. So we have to rework our models for these players and the impact on their teams, because right now, they're not the best players in the world. I mean, olofm is not playing, so he's discounted from the discussion entirely. And we don't know. It's indefinite as to when he'll be back yet. So forget about him for the time being. It's now no longer the case that, he's not around anymore. Well, yeah, exactly. He's not around. He's not even playing. Therefore, anyone who wins, they're playing against who's available. Then you got to add in the GuardiaN one. The asterisk is less significant because supposedly he's over his injury. Maybe he's just not as good anymore. You look at their teams. Navi's still a fantastic team. Sure, they're not winning at the moment. Fnatic are still good, but they've got their issues, and they're certainly not going to be as good, I don't think, with Wenton. Like, I can't see how that can possibly be as good. It's going to require Flasher, JW, and Crims to go ham. And Crims is obviously playing quite poorly at the moment, but that's who they are as a team right now. You can't just keep saying, but olofm. No, that doesn't work anymore. You got your time period for that, and that was very significant before. Now they're just who they are as Fnatic until they get olofm back. So as a result, what does that mean for CSGO? Well, first of all, Nico is the best player in the world. No asterisk needed. Doesn't need to be olofm's not here. Doesn't need to be GuardiaN's not here. Yes, if olofm comes back, then we'll say, let's see how good olofm does, and maybe he can take the throne right back. Right now, olofm can't even play. So Nico is the best player in the world. He's earned that spot. He's playing this fantastically. I actually think, I made this tweet a little while ago, from watching the way he plays LAN in and LAN out, I think olofm was a god. But the way olofm in this last couple of months was very, very good, but he wasn't as super sick as in early 2015, I thought, like the first half of 2015. So for me, Nico's level right now, even if olofm and GuardiaN were at that peak mode, I think he'd be slightly better right now. He is absolutely unbelievable. His game is so complete and all round, and he's delivering every time. He's got a killer instinct as well, which took someone like GuardiaN a while to develop, actually. So I think he would be the best anyway. So no asterisk needed for that. He's the best player in the world. Luminosity are the best team in the world. We don't need an asterisk for that. Na'Vi weren't winning all that many tournaments even when they had GuardiaN. They have GuardiaN in theory now. He says he's okay. Luminosity are the one winning the tournament. So Luminosity are the best team in the world. Fallen is the best AWPer in the world. He's AWPing better than GuardiaN right now. He does more for his team with the AWP. He has fantastic numbers across the lands with the AWP. I think overall he gets to be the best AWPer. Na'Vi is still a fantastic team, but they're not the best at the moment. So it's time to remove the asterisk. We're just going to give normal context as we would do with any tournament now, but you can see why it was necessary at that point in time when it was extra significant in that particular case.